Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Campolo. Welcome to episode 2 of AJC and the Web Devs. We're going to be having Ryan Carniato on here with us, and ideally he'll be hopping in here any minute now. I think that I did not communicate that it's always nice to hop on a couple minutes before a stream starts to actually get the stream going, but that is on me. So new thing to add to the docket when you bring on a guest. All right. But I can talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today because we're going to be talking about SolidJS. And if you don't know what Solid is, that's okay. There's a lot of new things out there in the web dev world all the time, and they're very hard to keep up with. I run an entire podcast based around keeping up with this kind of stuff. So it's one of the ways I've been able to stay hip with it. But it looks like we actually got Ryan here, so I'm going to go ahead and add him to the stream. Ryan, hello.
Hey, hopefully my audio is working.
Your audio sounds good. How's my audio sound?
Sounds good. No, we're good.
Excellent.
I had some technical difficulties just as I was joining on. My camera in OBS decided that it was in like portrait mode or something. It was really weird. It just like wouldn't get out of portrait mode. I don't know how that happened, but anyway.
This is why I don't use OBS. One day I'll get there. But yeah, thank you so much, Ryan, for being here. You are the second guest on this new stream that I'm starting, and you are a quite professional streamer at this point. You do like some of the longest streams in the industry that I see. I find your average is usually 3 to 4 hours is how you tend to do your streams, and you do like a weekly roundup of content. You bring on a guest, and then you just like hang out and debrief after. It's a bit of a similar format to what like Theo does. And if I find myself with far more hours in the day, I may find myself in that format one day as well. But why don't you just give a little intro for who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. As mentioned, my name's Ryan. I am a JavaScript front-end developer who ended up creating front-end framework SolidJS, and actually ended up through that process working on other front-end frameworks as well. Like Marco, I worked at eBay on that for a while. And it was, you mentioned the streaming and stuff. Basically, I found myself in a position where I was sort of working on kind of new ideas, and I had no framework. Like I came into certain spaces like Twitter and tried to tell people about this, and no one knew what I was talking about. I mean, part of it is because I'm kind of like deep down my path, so to speak, of very into JavaScript frameworks, performance and whatnot. So I'm like very deep there. But part of it was that I just realized that there was like a gap in terms of just like some of the base level knowledge to some of this more detailed knowledge. So I'd already been writing some articles, but I just started writing articles and streaming to kind of give a deeper look at some of the tools we use every day and maybe don't think about. So my content usually isn't very much about like necessarily like what you do on the job, like advanced techniques or that. It's about the actual underlying tools, how the frameworks work, why the decisions are made behind them and whatnot.
That's great. And your stream is one of the inspirations for this stream. I have a range of different streams that have inspired me. And what I really enjoyed is that you were leaning so heavily into newer frameworks, and both by building your own, but also by bringing on Quick and the like Fresh and Astro and frameworks that are really less than like 2 years old. And I think that when you look at the timeline of frameworks, like people have a hard time kind of separating. So, like when you first enter, like you see there's like 10 of these things. You're like, whoa, what's going on here? And there's like some of them are 5 years old, and then some of them are like 1 year old. And it's very hard to tell that difference like on the surface level until you really dig into them. So I really appreciate that you were going out and creating like really intense educational material around these brand new frameworks that almost no one knew anything about beyond their own doc sites. There's almost no resources available for any of these things. And that's the same approach I took with FS Jam. And you actually got me in touch with Dylan for Marco. And Marco is a framework that is 7 or 8 years old, had never had a podcast episode about it. No one had ever gotten on a podcast and just talked about Marco. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And since then, he's been on PodRocket, and more people are starting to talk about it here. Like Matt Billman mentions Marco, and I talked to him about new frameworks. So I think that's super cool. And people who are kind of okay leaning into like the learning a million tools thing because they want to compare different tools across each other and weigh trade-offs. Like this material I find like really, really useful for people. And what you do is you do the Hacker News clone. Why do you choose Hacker News as the baseline app for all of these frameworks?
Yeah, I mean the thing is every there's like a few demos that we end up using over and over again because they're simple enough to reproduce, and they are kind of illustrative. The most common one probably is to do MVC. And to do MVC is great because it shows you list management. It shows you all the kind of mechanics of doing mutation and stuff. But a lot of times, well, the one thing to do MVC is missing is there's no concept of data fetching. And to be fair, data mutation isn't in Hacker News as well. So it's not like the full demo per se. But I ended up just using Hacker News because it was basically like the simplest task, I suppose, of a website isn't necessarily the interactivity. It's like showing something, right? It's like, get me a page, put some data on the page, and show me it. And that's what Hacker News example does. You get to see data fetching. If you're opinionated, like a full stack framework, you can see the back end part of that as well. Like it gives us the ability to kind of just see what it takes to put a simple page up. There were some other more technical stuff that came out of that demo that I didn't realize at first, but actually was really relevant to these new frameworks, right? Because the Hacker News demo is a mostly static page with just some, I mean, don't get me wrong, that the listing of content makes up the majority of what you see, but like it is a very simple app. So it very much shows and the difference between these different techniques because, like, let's face it, a lot of apps, like not apps or sites, let's say, are fairly simple. Like you have a few points of where data kind of comes in, and otherwise you have this kind of shell. So Hacker News is really representative of that. And what I really ended up liking in the long term is that the comments page has this kind of collapsible comment thing. And as it turns out, that is the perfect sort of scenario to show the benefits of things like islands and whatnot, because it's like there's a lot of tricks and imperative code and hacks and things you can do. Like any framework has escape hatches, so you can go back into just using vanilla JS. That's what's like awesome about the web platform. You can always just kind of, if something isn't performing enough, just go a bit lower level. But the as it turns out, the comment page on the Hacker News demo doesn't let you kind of go halfway. You either like do it like the way, classic single page app way, or with these islands frameworks you can actually do it a different way. But the single page app way can't cheat it to get performance. Like they're stuck with the approach. So it served as like a way of actually showing quite visually the difference between some of these kind of partial hydrated techniques versus not.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to look at today is the Hacker News demo in particular. And I was looking for kind of like the canonical solid implementation of this, and I found one, and I was surprised that it was still using Rollup. And so part of what we might do is, if we have time, migrate this to Vite as well and get you a pull request to kind of update that. But it worked in like its current form, but I never really learned Rollup, honestly, and when I use it, stuff gets wonky and there's like weird local host stuff, and like I don't know. But the main thing we're gonna do is just kind of like look at the project first, look at the structure of it. I actually even took it and simplified it further, so it's like kind of less files and like kind of shove some stuff together, so it's more like a single file component thing. So this is not meant to be like the perfect way of organizing the project. This is like, I want to show how could you do this in like the most kind of concise way with Solid. So I made a couple like opinionated decisions in how I like took out like the components directory and stuff like that. But that's just for the sake of like this stream.
Yeah, I mean, this example, for a little bit of history, I didn't create the original version of it, and I think I actually mentioned in the README. There's a lot of Hacker News examples, and there was one site called Hacker News PWA or HNPWA that was up and great for a while. But if you go on the site now, like literally every link there is dead. Like not every link, but a lot of them are dead. And what ended up happening was I finally found one that I kind of liked, and that was the one that Evan you made for Vue 2. And that's what we've been porting around here forever. It's this old JS thing. And the thing is, what ended up happening was I made the first example, and then every time I got Solid Start involved, we haven't talked about our meta framework or like tried different deployments and different things. I just kept on building on it. I never really went back to the original. The first time I actually went back to the original was for the Solid Start stream that I did a few weeks back, kind of introducing it. And I kind of did a similar thing. But what was funny was I made that mistake. I assumed I was on Vite. And I was just going to call it across, and I'm like 2 minutes before the show, and I'm like, oh crap, this is in Rollup, right. And it's not in TypeScript or anything. So I like tried to scramble very quickly.
That's fine. We don't need to put it in TypeScript. We're not going there.
So yeah. This example is very old, but probably dating back to 2016, 2017 originally, if you go back to what Evan did. But
okay, that's cool. But what's awesome though is that one, it still works. Like I clone it down, I spin it up, like the site is running and does all of the same stuff you would have wanted to do before. So like people talk about, JavaScript world always like fast moving and breaking and stuff like that. And it's like, no, actually some of this stuff can stay stable and will just run if you don't like mess with it. And I was able to like just kind of move some components around and kind of get it to where I wanted it to look very, very easily. And this is me not really having used Solid previously, just knowing how these projects are structured and kind of understanding the conventions and knowing how JSX components work. I just ran and I was able to move stuff around. I was able to refactor it in a way where I didn't break anything. I was able to pull out a couple pages, and it was like very, very simple to do. It's like that's a testament to the simplicity of what you've built to a React developer who's never even used Solid before.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm glad to hear it. There's always like little things here, little differences, little different decisions we made in trade-offs, but structurally, you can take a React mentality and definitely like apply that to Solid from a high level structure sort of point. People do other stuff as well, but a lot of similar concepts and stuff. So I'm glad to hear that went smoothly for you.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's get some screen sharing going and start looking at some code. I'm gonna have to arrange things on screen real quick. I want to get the chat in here.
Yeah.
One day I will have Ben Myers on here and he will show me how to build in actual chat. But what I do is I just throw the chat on my page while I share, and then you can all see it. And let me close this out actually for now. And let's just look at this project real quick. So how does the Cloudflare stuff work before we get into any of this? Because this is something I'm just kind of curious about, is that there's an index.js in the root here, which has Cloudflare KV asset handler. What is this file doing?
Right. Yeah. Now I'm actually looking at this because the funniest thing is I must have gone in here at one point to change the deployment, because when I originally did this Rollup example, I was deploying it probably to something like GitHub pages, right? Because this is the single page app version of it. And I was probably kind of hacking it around a bit, and I must have changed it to use KV. And my guess, Cloudflare, my guess is KV is to serve all the static assets for this site. So if we're going to do something like non-Cloudflare, it shouldn't really affect much, because we don't use KV for the actual like the way I did this was I probably used a serverless function to serve the static assets. So if you deploy say to Netlify or somewhere else, I don't think we will need to worry about this. This was just something I hacked together so that I could basically just this is just
I was actually able to get this running on Cloudflare, or not Cloud, on Netlify very, very simply, and it was Solid Hacker News Rollup.netlify.app, and you just need to have a build command. So that could be npm run build, and then you had to change dist to public, because when you actually build it, it creates a public folder. So that's the only thing that you need to do, and you can actually do that if you just create a netlify.toml file.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Build.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with single page apps is in some ways they're kind of simple in that, like, you just have an output folder and then you're back to kind of like a static set of assets. So as long as you have a way of doing it, there's probably like a better way of doing it than this. I never really used static gen or CDNs, and I probably built this while I was in the middle of making like Cloudflare adapters for Solid Start. So I probably just was like, okay, I know, I was literally just making a serverless function, I'll make another one. It's probably not even the best way of doing it, but yeah, you like in this Netlify thing, you literally are just publishing that folder. You're like, make all the assets in the public folder, upload this folder on Netlify, done. So that's always a nice thing about single page apps in terms of simplicity from that side. It still requires this whole build tool thing, which I think is the non-simplicity from the other side. Some people are like, oh, if I just have a server and serve some files, that's simple in the opposite way, where here we do all the building ahead of time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So now we're actually running it locally.
Okay.
And for some reason, if I had it on the original one, 5,000, and tried that, it was giving me this. I have no idea why. I opened an issue on the repo, but I just changed it to fix that.
I suspect it's something locally on your computer in terms of what your local host port can handle. Because, like, yeah, I mean, I've
it's an Apple thing, as far as I know. This has come
yeah.
up before, and Apple has something running on 5,000 by default. I thought I had turned it off, but that was probably on my old machine. So whatever
Yeah.
it is, I would need to go look into what that is. But you're gonna have a lot of random Apple users who have no idea what to do about this.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely fair. This is like the old setup. I did my primary dev on Windows, or running what do you call it, the Linux emulation under Windows for years and years and years and years. I actually only got my first Apple for home use. Like, I've been using Apple at work, but first Apple for home use when the M1 Airs came out. So yeah, this demo was definitely made when I was doing everything in Windows.
All right, well, this looks like Ben just gave us a resource here for this. Yeah, that sounds about right. But just changing the port number is probably going to be a quicker solution for most people anyway, but it's nothing to note. Okay, so let's actually get into the components here. So there is a solid router, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is old. Yeah. This is going to be fun. I mean, this is fine the way this works, but like I'm pretty sure the router has gone through a few iterations since I made this demo.
Yeah, so we don't have to dwell on the router too much then, because the router layer is going to be handled in Solid Start. So my question for you is, will Solid Start be including the solid router and then you building a metafabric on that, or is there a new router that is being built along with Solid Start?
No, it's just Solid's router. The file system routing that we do in Solid Start is just on top. It's just on top of the router. That was one of the cool things about using Vite and stuff, is we've kind of built a ecosystem on all the exact same libraries you'd use without Solid Start or with Solid Start. It's all the same stuff.
Okay, cool. And so what's happening here is we're creating paths and then we're lazy loading the components.
Yeah, and one other thing, you'd see this data thing. This is a pattern that we've had in Solid for a few years now. It's kind of like, I guess, loaders and things people have been talking about. You know, I think Tan Stack location also has a kind of load idea, but we had this idea that this is a nested router. So for each, even though this app isn't nested, for each section of the route, you can set a function that's almost like a component itself, where you can set the data requirements for that route or path. And if it's nested, the router will fetch them all in parallel, and in parallel to the code splitting. So you can actually pull the data, pull the code, even nested, and it all kind of stitches together. And what you see here, this is interesting, because I'm trying to think of how old this is, because is
this not the best way to demo Solid, or is this just like something that kind of needs to be refactored?
Yeah, I mean, it is, well, use data here. Is this being called anywhere, this use data function? Because I'm not.
So we've got, let's go look at just like the structure here. So we've got pages, and then we've got the API here, and this is what's hitting. You have these APIs that are actually pulling in the stories and the user data. And then this is what's being pulled in for, you have these data.js files that are then hitting that API, and then that's being displayed for each of these components.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. Oh, right. This file has multiple components in it, doesn't it? That's why I'm not seeing.
Yeah, so you have story, and then you have
okay. So this hasn't changed that much. There's been a slight bit of renaming.
So there's the story component here, and then let me do this to make it a little more easy to follow what's happening here.
Yeah. Okay. This is fine actually. We'll be good here because basically, I was thrown off because I was trying to find use data. We still use these exact patterns. I think over time things have shifted a little bit, but this is actually this is fine. Yeah. So I can speak to this. But if this is where you want to start, we can start here.
Yeah. Okay. So this is our stories component, and then what is the show component?
Right. One of the things when you have fine-grained updates, the components don't rerun again from top to bottom, and we need kind of anchor points for deciding like where to swap things out. And one of the, for something like showing or hiding something, we could have just used an expression to do that, like, because the way reactivity works, it looks at how should I put it? It looks at reactive values, so like our signals and our data, and whenever that changes, that part of the code changes. Show seemed nicer to at least me ergonomically than having like kind of like helper functions for reactivity. So we decided to do stuff as components because it just fit into the tree a lot slicker.
So show is a data fetching component?
No, it's like a toggle visibility. It's like a ternary operator.
Okay, so where's this use data stuff coming in then?
Right, use data comes from the route, and if you look, you imported it from the router, and the router will know that because this page is getting rendered from like the way we set up our route config, we're like on this path, render this component. It will know that data refers to the data function that we registered for that route, which by convention in here, I think is like stories.data.ts, and this right next to it
was this one. Yeah.
Right. So what ends up happening here is when we resolve the route at the exact same time, we fetch the data for the component and we run this function. And what this function is doing is it's doing a bunch of setup stuff for us. We can return really anything from it, but I want to point out this is not an async function. This is not blocking. This is just a mechanism for kind of setting up some data fetching and reactivity. So create the first couple things are just kind of convenience-based wrappers. The reactivity, everything's based on access, like when you access a property or call a function. So to do some basic formatting, all I did was wrap it in a function here with page and type. The reason I did that was because we're gonna pass it back out again at the end there. You see page and type are getting returned. And I wanted the ability to basically just have these kind of useful things, because if I calculate them here, I don't want to calculate them again in my component. They're going to come up a number of times. It's going to be like, what page am I on? What type am I on? But the big one here is this create resource. And what create resources is it's a primitive, which is kind of like use state or create signal kind of. But this one is a built-in one that's built for data fetching. And signature-wise, it looks like a lot like something like SWR or React Query, which kind of give you an indicator of what it does, because what we're doing here is the first argument, again, a function, is basically our query. It's basically a reactive expression where whenever type or page changes, we're going to basically regenerate this query and then call fetch API with that data.
Yeah, this is super, super interesting to me, because in Redwood, we have data fetching conventions, and there's data fetching conventions now in Remix and SvelteKit, and like building some sort of hook to do data fetching is like lots and lots of libraries have it now. Lots of frameworks have it. and it's interesting to me. Like, how is there? So you have. Is there any error handling built in here? Like, what happens if there's an error? Like, how does the error get handled?
Yeah, to be fair, this example and on all of them was very simplistic for my purposes of handling it.
So the create resource does not have an error handling convention kind of built into it.
Or it does. I just didn't use it in these examples because.
Okay, gotcha. So I would just throw in like error, and then I would have an error.
Well, there's a couple of things. The resource itself has there's two patterns, and this is where the complexity comes in, because the general pattern we use quite often is something called suspense boundaries, and error boundaries, and those are harder to explain but easier to like use, in that like you just use the code as regular, and if you hit an error, the error boundary will catch the error and display an alternate reality where that error is. However, if you don't want to use the error boundary and you want to do something more fine-grained, if you go stories.error, there's there like the story, that primitive .error is the error, and there's also .loading.
Okay. That's really cool. Yeah, because if you have that stuff just kind of like on hand that you can pull out easily, and this is what I really like about Redwood cells, is that you have a cell, and the cell literally generates like a success, an error, a loading, and an empty state. It just gives that to you like out of the box.
Right. And
I find that very few other data fetching conventions kind of include all of that. They usually include maybe 2 or 3 of those pieces, but never all 4.
Yeah, we've been slowly extending it, but yeah, there's loading, there's error, and the question of whether it's resolved. There's some changes and updates in 1.5 to have like a state field, which actually has all 5 different states of the resource, so you can introspect it, type safe, type narrowing, all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, the reason we built a primitive might not seem very obvious to people at first, because a lot of these patterns usually they have like an async function, but because of everything in Solid is about like these signals that propagate in a granular way, async functions are blocking. Like you have to like wait for them, and well, that's convenient to a certain sense, because then you don't have to worry about things being undefined at different points. You'll see a bunch of question marks in here if you actually noticed. Well, there was like optional chaining operators in a few places, I think.
Yeah, right here.
You know, like it's because we don't block. We literally just go ahead and try and do as much work as possible immediately. So like even with things like suspense and stuff, we don't throw and re-render, because we don't re-render in Solid. We'll like, if the code loads before the data, we'll start building your DOM ahead of time with what we can. And then when the data comes in, we'll just complete it, like just fill in the gaps. If the data comes before the code comes in, then no worries. When the code comes in, it'll just render it. But essentially, there's no worry about like essentially we can do as much work as soon as we can this way.
Cool. Yeah, no, this is very interesting. This is so I get why this is a good real world example of Solid, because you're getting into both using a router, you're getting into data fetching, you're getting into a lot of the stuff that an actual like front end app is gonna have to do. It's not necessarily the best like hello world example, because it doesn't kind of like it's all there already kind of for you. And so this is the idea I kind of originally had, is that we would kind of build this up like piece by piece, but I don't think that would be particularly simple to do because of how this like particular example is set up. But what I did want to do is figure out how to migrate this to Vite. And you were saying that mostly the whole project stays the same. We're going to have to change the index.js file. So let's dive into that and see if we can get that working. I feel like in the next half hour, that shouldn't be the most impossible job. And I know that you have a solid templates repo that includes like a bunch of stuff here. And so we're going to grab the JS example in particular. So I'm going to clone this down.
While you're doing this, one of the cool things I want to mention here is we've been talking about this, and you were comparing Solid to Redwood, and I just wanted to put out there, like this is just the client side. This isn't even the meta framework of the Solid Start. This is just the client side, normal using, like you could build it and host from CDN side of the story. And this is why like the primitive approach I really like, because moving to Solid Start, sure, there's some stuff like file-based routing and whatnot, but like for the most part, it's the exact same experience. The data functions still exist, and they still work actually identical way. They when you resolve a route, whether on server or client, they do the same thing, and you create resources. It's all the exact same pattern, whether you're doing client-side rendering, server-side rendering with client-side pickup, whether you're doing MPAs, whether it's even the same pattern doing islands. It's literally always the same. So it's my belief, if you create the right primitives, you have like the right foundations to kind of build upon. And it's about being adaptable to different situations rather than being too flexible. Although I have to admit, create resource kind of breaks my cardinal rules a bit, because it's like it's the most advanced primitive. It does almost too much, but it's kind of, data fetching is a tricky thing, and I found that the only thing I could actually break out of it was the caching level. The create resource does not have no caching. So if people want that like React query cache and validation kind of thing, you generally build a wrapper on top of create resource in Solid. But on the positive, if you use create resource in Solid, it just works for your own stuff like that. It works with suspense. It works with error boundaries. Basically, the whole rest of the ecosystem is just going to work with you. It works with SSR. Like it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going about this in like the most naive way possible, where I'm just like copy and pasting stuff from the other project into this one.
The funniest thing is this might almost just work.
Like, I know, right? I'm sorry. We'll need to make a couple tweaks, I'm sure, but if this can get us most of the way there, that would be hilarious to me. So there's some CSS here we need.
Yeah, I mean, first thing is, I don't think the starter template's going to have things like the router.
It won't, yeah. And I talked to Dan about this ahead of time, and so that'll be one thing we'll need to figure out. So I'm just getting everything into the project so I can kind of throw out the other one at a certain point. I think that's most of the important stuff. Copy pasted the index.js and the CSS, and then there'll already be an index.html. So let's see what starts happening here. So let me first start by like not actually doing any of this. Let's comment everything out. So it just runs the actual base example that you would expect it to do.
Yeah, to be fair, if you didn't hook up the router and you kept the app in there, it probably should be running the basic example, unless we like deleted something.
Yeah, no, I haven't deleted anything, so I'm only adding stuff at this point. So everything should be mostly groovy. And looks like you're using PNPM. Good job there.
Yeah, that was a more recent update on these templates. Yeah,
and you tend to use dev, or you start. Oh yeah, dev. This one good.
Last yeah.
One. All right, sweet. All right, we're up and running there. That's good.
I love how create React app is like I think I forget if it was even 11D or like, but maybe not 11D, but like a lot of like this spinning logo thing is.
This is hilarious. I have not seen this Hello World example from someone who just literally takes the exact thing with a but rotates the look. I love it. Oh my god, I love it.
Yeah. But what I was getting at is we're not the only ones who have done this. Like create React's like opening spinning logo is almost iconic now.
It is, yeah. Go for them. Yeah. Okay, let's see what happens.
So yeah, I mean, right now, what's the entry look like? I guess like index.
So the entry point will be pulling in index.js, and so index.js. So this is where we need to figure out the. Let me post this up. Let's see what. Hold on, people are memeing us. Let's see. Okay, create 11D app. Does it rotate? Yeah. It rotates.
Yeah, that's.
Oh wow, that was a while ago. All right, good. Of course, Ben hit me with the 11D. 11D did it first, so I love it. I love it.
Yeah. No, it was funny though, because 11D often isn't really thought of like React is like a interactive JavaScript framework. 11D example of doing that is actually more amusing, I think, than even Solid or some other libraries doing it.
Yeah, no, it is funny. Actually, I spent a decent amount of time working on Slinkity, which was trying to basically take 11D and turn it into Astro. So I have a deep respect for that whole kind of paradigm shift and how hard it is to do.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing here is Yeah, if we just circumvent the app component, I think we're
So
almost
do we need the
there.
service worker part here?
Nah, I mean that's just that. Whatever. Yeah. But if you circumvent the app part, I think comment. We can leave the refresh reload at the top, but yeah.
Let's keep the CSS in there.
Well, though the CSS might have been coming in somewhere
Oh
else.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
How was the CSS coming in? Is a good question.
So
No.
CSS is coming up from here, and so I had that, and then this would be the new CSS. But first, let's see what error we get in here. So we need solid router. Obviously, that would be the first thing. So can I just pm install this?
I suspect that you want version 3 because version 4 is like I mentioned the APIs are different. It might be a small lift though.
So like that.
Yeah, I suspect this is what you want though. It might even be 2, honestly. That example is really
okay. Let me just do is it just solid router like that?
The thing is, we've actually recently moved it, but then you'd have to change all the npm imports. It's now at solid/router, but it's fine. We can probably do this one.
This is 0.4.2.
Yeah. That's sorry. When I meant version 3, I meant 0.3. But yeah.
I see. Okay, so
this will be fine. My suspicion is we'll only have to rename one thing, which is it's not used data anymore. It's used.
Okay, something happened. Interesting.
Yeah. My suspicion is it's not used data anymore. It's used route data, which means
where do I go to fix that?
Into the stories. Not that one. That one. Instead of use data, it's used route data. Yeah, I believe. Yeah, and make sure the import matches. I think that's probably the.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So maybe I was wrong about the CSS, but yeah, I mean.
Nice. Yeah. That was the magic right there. That was tight. All right, now I just gotta figure out the CSS.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe it's just import in the index.jsx. Maybe that's all it is. Yeah.
There we go. We're up and running. Beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, navigate around to make sure that things go. But I mean, yeah, I mean, this looks good. Although, you simplified it. You removed some.
Yeah, I pulled out some stuff from the top. I just 2 pages or just a new route and then the home route because I wanted to make this like as easy and comprehensible as possible.
Vite is great in that it's more of that like. The thing is, in Vite, you just have that index HTML, right? And you just said point it at index, and then all the other stuff falls away, right? Whereas in the Rollup build, we were doing almost the same sort of thing, but there was no index HTML, so I had to come up with a special plugin. And the HTML files, like in the Rollup build, is a string that I like inject everything into. This is just so much nicer, but it's cool how this just like pretty much just ports across. I mean, Vite is great because it's basically like just this bundler that has so much capability built in, like CSS modules and all that kind of stuff. It's just you just import the CSS and it works. You didn't need like there's a certain amount of plugin capability that you don't even have to like worry about. Like in Rollup to set that up actually took a bunch of work, whereas Vite is just like ready to go pretty much out of the box.
All right, I'm getting this onto a Git repo. This is my epic snippet that creates and pushes a whole repo all at once. Let's see, Solid.
What's interesting about approaching learning or looking at Solid from this kind of like I don't know what to call it. It's not like the typical like when we teach Solid, we teach reactivity and we teach JSX, we teach the fundamentals. But coming at it from this like kind of bird's eye view, is say like I'm a React developer. I've created React apps before. I'm going to just like take
this thing and shove it up on the internet.
Yeah,
that's what I've been trained to do.
Right, and just like drop some code in, and some JSX and just kind of structurally get it to work. Like from that perspective, like this all it's like, okay, there's a few little different conventions here, but this all kind of makes sense, right? You're just like, okay, put the app in, drop in the JSX, and then there you go.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Let's figure out the That's
I,
on PMPM run
I
build.
sometimes I think that's the danger with us though, because you can get pretty far. Oh yeah, there's another use data on the other route.
Yeah, you can get pretty far without realizing you broke something stupid like right here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, TypeScript would get after you on that one, but also, yeah, wherever it's used.
Are we? And then it's gonna be.
Yeah. But what I was getting at is you can get pretty far.
I didn't need TypeScript for that, so
You can get pretty far treating React or treating Solid like React. You could be building full apps and kind of doing stuff until you realize that it's actually different. And this is kind of good because
it makes this now not public. It looks like.
Yes. Again,
that's good.
Yeah. But it's kind of good because you were instantly productive and you're just like, oh yeah, this is solid, kind of like React. It's like React, it's solid, But I sometimes wonder though, because at a certain point, there's an inevitability here that you will hit the difference, and if you weren't expecting it, because at this point, have you looked at Solid's docs really much at all?
I mean, I've watched a lot of streams where you and Dan walk people through lots of Solid concepts. So like I get like there's the signal concepts and there's all this kind of stuff around reactivity. Like we didn't hit any of that in this stream, which I think is kind of what you're getting at here. But I find that if I have code examples that are already working, I can do almost anything I want with it when it's in this paradigm, because the things that are working, I know not to change. And the things that I know how to move around, I know how to move around. But that's because it was already working. I didn't have to actually create this from scratch. Like this example already existed. So like if I had to actually do this from scratch with an API that I wasn't familiar with, and I had to do that from the beginning to the end, yes, doing that with React versus Solid, there would be differences, and there would be important differences that I would not necessarily know until I hit those issues. But then when I hit those issues, I just go to the Solid Discord and I ask for help.
There you go. Yeah, no, for sure. I just yes, that's what I was kind of talking about. Just in general, the sort of it's surprising how far you can get without actually getting into it when you approach it from this side. And sometimes I have to be careful with it because it can lead to some unexpected stuff sometimes. But I think we're going to be really good here. And yeah,
I think this is going to work. We'll see. And you now are employed by Netlify to work on Solid. Yes.
Yeah. The mandate's a little bit open on the open source side. I've been doing a lot of Solid. A lot of stuff we're doing Solid is very, like we're really trying to push stuff out with Solid Start. And I've been doing obviously all the work around Solid Core to support that. So yeah, that's what I've mostly been doing. But I've also been able to, as you mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time covering and doing learning about the new frameworks and the different approaches. And Netlify has been very supportive in me continuing to help both promote those frameworks and work with them on various tasks or things that will kind of help them figure out where they need to be. I've been spending some time vetting the new Builder.io benchmarks that Steve from Builder.
Oh, cool. Can you talk about those actually? And also hello to Trost in the chat. I would love to know. Builder is an awesome company that is building a framework with Quick and Quick City. I'm trying to talk and debug my builds at the same time. But yeah, so talk about Builder.io and what their benchmark is.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Builder, like if you step like way back out, is they're basically like a low code solution for building sites. So it's like really easy for designers to come in and kind of just use the tools and then generate the sites they need. And they have like a bunch of tooling around that low code, and like there's something called mitosis, which does like converts components from like a single format into like any framework. Their whole idea
mitosis is really interesting. Yeah,
their whole desire here was to make it really easy for people to kind of have like a single entry point and then build the best apps they could. And Steve was having some trouble though, because he was doing a lot of e-commerce sites, very common with these kind of, design heavy content type sites. And he was like, the performance, they weren't getting good Lighthouse scores. And this is like one of those competitive edges. So he started looking more and more into how he could get better performance. And actually that started with Solid. Mitosis's original syntax was based off Solid. Like the idea of using JSX as a way of converting to any component was kind of based off what we'd done with Solid, because Solid was very different than React, but looked similar. And he over time the syntax became more like React. But what ended up happening is he realized that like it wasn't just the JavaScript framework thing. They needed to look at loading and all that stuff, and that's how Quick was born and how Party Town was born. But yeah, the interesting thing about that is Quick is a crazy departure on architecture in terms of like how we can build apps, like in terms of like the way JavaScript is loaded, what work happens when the browser starts up. And that's a whole amount of crazy detail though. But the problem is we don't know
That
the
trade.
There you go. That's awesome. Yeah, I was saying we don't know the details there of what those trade-offs are. Like there's the costs of lazy loading, costs of data serialization to do resumability. Like there's a lot of details in there. So he started benchmarking the various kind of meta frameworks. So it's kind of like a higher level benchmark just to see like what their loading times were and how long they took to hydrate. Simple examples. And he was using Lighthouse and a combination of a few other tools to basically get an idea of the overhead of different frameworks. And the funniest thing is, I guess he found what he was looking for, because we started doing the tests, and I was like super stoked that he had a harness, because I've complained that we don't have good hydration tests. And the funny thing that I actually realized, because I spent a lot of time on Solid optimizing the micro, so to speak, like fastest string renderer, fastest, thing to do an update on 10,000 tables. It's all very like very specific in terms of like a series of benchmarks. I hadn't like stopped back and like tried to just hit requests against a Express server, like go all the way back out. And the thing was, we found what we were measuring, because most of the bottleneck and most of the expense wasn't from the UI framework. It wasn't because like I know that React string rendering, or sorry, like server rendering, is much slower than other solutions, but that wasn't where we hit most of the bottleneck. It was actually as we've been working through this, we're realizing like there's just different things that happen on the server in these meta frameworks that are actually performance overheads that you don't even realize. It wasn't actually the framework, but actually the meta framework. We can see differences between, say, Next and Gatsby, or Remix or whatever, just because of like these other things, which, as I said, it's inconclusive. But maybe because we're still working on them, they're new. But there's a lot of overhead that we're not even.
There's a lot of downstream effects of architectural decisions that you don't think about. Like you build these frameworks, and like you go towards like what feels nice and what feels right and what makes a nice DX experience, and then all of a sudden, like you're 2 or 3 years into it, and you're like, wait a second, there's this implication of how we built this. And like, plenty of frameworks have hit this. Like there's no use pointing fingers, because it happens to a lot of us. But like this is Redwood. Like Redwood built this entire serverless model, realized serverless functions at minimum are going to take you 1 to 2 seconds to get a response. And you're like, that's the benchmark. Like you're never going to be faster than that. Like that's a huge issue. And then you have to like re-architect your entire deal to make it work. So like meta frameworks need to think about this stuff. They need to think very hard about this stuff, because you can build these bottlenecks in very, very easily.
And when you take a performance like approach at the beginning, it's a lot easier to get there. And I think that's why they're building these right now. Quick has just started on Quick City, and they're like, we've added the base features we want. Let's see what the performance indications are of those. And like it's already helped for them, because their SSR was actually slow enough that it was noticeable in these benchmarks. So they actually moved off JS DOM and moved to string rendering on the server. As I said, that wasn't the biggest overhead.
I mean, Redwood doesn't even have SSR.
So
we still don't even have SSR.
Right. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like SSG obviously will remove that, but even the way files are served, compression, there's like a lot of stuff in there that we haven't been measuring, so we don't even have an indicator on. And I'm super stoked that that work is being done here, and that's why I'm spending time here, because I want to do some benchmarking myself, more on the hydration side. But like just coming in and seeing like his benchmark from playing with it, I already found several bottlenecks in Solid. Like I mentioned, it wasn't the rendering, but I did it and I was like, oh, the way we insert assets in the head of the document was really slow. Like, and like using a benchmark actually helped me see that, so like it's kind of funny, like little almost tertiary stuff can make such an impact on these kind of things. So as I said, it's hard because when you make benchmarks, you end up chasing the benchmarks, and that's not like the only benchmark to go by. But on the other hand, when you're void, when you have no way of kind of measuring, other than just some like arbitrary lighthouse score you do on a page insight, there's very little you can necessarily do with that. I'm super stoked at the potential of at least having more measurements and more places to see where we can make improvements.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll drop us some links in the chat here for your Twitter, which is just Ryan Carniato. And then we got solidjs.com. Any other places you want to direct our viewers here to learn more about Solid or your own work?
Yeah, I mean, those are both really good. I'm thinking here, the website has a link to the Discord, the GitHub, like all the important stuff for Solid's community.
Great Discord. Awesome Discord.
Thank you. We try our best. It's an interesting place. A lot of different people with like a lot of we have a lot of, like, as I've mentioned before, like framework authors and like people working on other projects kind of sitting in there and like debating the different elements. It sometimes gets kind of crazy off, where somebody's like, this CSS and JS solutions come through this one, and then they'll both go off or something, and they'll come back, and then two people have created two new libraries on to show their, like, how they could picture doing it. I'm very proud and stoked about having that kind of open discourse where people aren't afraid to tell me that they're like, Solid's not very good here. I'm like, okay, well let's talk about it. So
that's cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, Ryan. This was a ton of fun, and just thank you for like being an open resource to people who are interested in open source or frameworks or anything like that. There's been times where I've written articles that have like referenced your work, and I've like sent those to you, and you've like given me notes on them, and so like stuff like that is just it's like so thankful for that. So like really appreciate all the work you do, and I think you're a really fantastic mentor just in the community. And I'm super stoked you got hired by Netlify, and you get to work on more open source stuff there. So I think it's just all up and to the right for Ryan and Solid right now, and I'm very, very happy to see it.
yeah, no, thank you so much. It's been amazing. And then honestly, anyone who spends the time to teach people, it's such an important part of what we do. I am more than willing to help or provide insight for, because like that, like there, as much as there's a certain amount of knowledge that comes within our profession, and as much as we do a lot of effort to lower the bar and all that, like it's still there, and it's critical that we continue to find better ways to be able to explain these topics and concepts so that they're reachable by anyone.
Yeah, definitely. And that's the mission of this stream. So I think that's a good place to end off here. Thank you everyone who was in the chat, who was hanging out. Had a lot of great friends here watching along. And this should be a weekly thing every Monday. I may bump this back an hour because I'm beefing with Jen Janode right now in terms of we have a similar stream time. So I might do this an hour later next week. But Monday mornings is when I would like to do this. Monday morning kind of lunchtime for all you out there in America, and hopefully people in other parts of the world as well. And yeah, this will close out for us. This was AJC and the Web Devs, episode 2. Come back next week for possibly a solo stream. And then we got Travis on board for episode 4. So Bedrock Layouts, CSS, that'll be coming at you. That'll be 3 weeks from now, I think, because I'm taking a week off. But that'll all be in the Twitter. So thank you so much, Ryan, for being here, and we're going to close off here.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.